Welcome back. In this part of the lecture, I want to discuss the remaining part of the Roman Empire, the eastern part of it, and also the rise of Islam. As we can see in the book and mentioned in the previous lectures, the eastern part of the Roman Empire lived on. It eventually became known as the Byzantine Empire. Well, one thing I want you to keep in mind is though it was called the Byzantine Empire, the people who lived in it and the rulers who ruled over it saw themselves as Romans. They saw themselves carrying on the traditions of the Roman Empire itself. So even though they were called the Byzantines, and the man up top was called the Byzantine Emperor, or sometimes the Byzantine Empress, they saw themselves as Romans. This is no more clearly shown than one of the famous Byzantine emperors. His name was Justinian. Justinian set out with the goal of recapturing Rome itself and parts of the old Western Roman Empire. And he actually did so with the help of his magnificent general, Belisarius. They recaptured Rome, they pushed back the Germanic tribes from North Africa and even parts of Spain, and they re-established essentially what our former Roman Empire used to look like. You can see this clearly on a map on page 197. Now this didn't last forever, and eventually those parts of the Roman Empire in the West eventually fell back into Germanic hands. And what Justinian is in fact more famous for is his code of law. The Roman emperors throughout past would issue statements essentially called edicts, or laws and decisions that they would make that would effectively become law. I discussed one of the most famous ones in our first video, the Edict of Milan, where Constantine basically issued a toleration of Christianity throughout the empire. Well, what Justinian did with help of his jurists and lawyers is went back through time, looked at all the various edicts, and put them into one centralized volume, essentially a code of law. Now, this code of law became extremely important in the Byzantine Empire to actually serve as the basis for imperial law for the next 1,000 years in the Byzantine Empire. But since it was written in Latin, the future medieval kingdoms over in Western Europe, for example, France, those in Germany, Italy, and Spain, and England, used Justinian's code as their basis for their own laws, as they could read Latin and used Latin for their official government documents. Now later on, moving into the 8th century, the Greek language would actually surmount the Latin language in the Byzantine Empire. So by the 8th century, the Byzantine Empire was essentially a Greek and Christian state. The city of Constantinople by this time was in fact one of the most well-established and I think biggest cities in Europe itself. It had a huge magnificent wall that was used to protect it. It was actually a center of trade and religion throughout the region and became one of Europe's most prominent cities. Another religion that actually rose up at this time was Islam. Islam was started by Muhammad. Islam taught that there is no God but Allah, and the Quran is the main center focus. The Quran is essentially close to their version of the Bible, their most central focus of Islam. Islam itself was not meant simply as a religion, but it was meant as a way of life. The Islamic Empire, which started in the Middle East, spread rapidly and sometimes violently. And by 750 AD, the Islamic Empire had taken over the entire Middle East, had moved into North Africa, and even taken over the majority of the Iberian Peninsula, was essentially modern-day Portugal and Spain. The rapid advance of the Islamic Empire set up what it would become one of the greatest culture clashes in Western civilization. That with the expanding Islamic Empire and the defense of Christian Europe. And we'll see how that plays out in the later chapters throughout the medieval period. Next, we're going to have a video that's going to be discussing Charles the Great, Charlemagne, and then I'll be back with one more video for you guys. See you then.